every action we make is a preparation of death.
This is Endgame. I'm Amanda Cassatt.
Bryan Johnson.
Bryan Johnson.
Bryan Johnson. Bryan Johnson.
Bryan Johnson.
We have Bryan Johnson.
Death has always been a staple, but I would say that our ability to adapt to new circumstances is remarkable.
Do you think that we won't survive as a species unless we disable our attachment to wealth, money, and power?
I don't think it's realistic to ask humans to change. We are wired the way we are. The world is structured the way it is.
Would you take a drug that turned off your physiological response to social status?
I would absolutely trial it.
We're going to debate life versus death. People can choose to die or could accidentally die. And the idea is that people would have health span, so they wouldn't decay, but they would continue getting to live feeling well. You want to go first?
I would ask you to go first because I think the continuation of living is the default right now.
Okay.
That basically a person can live as long as they choose, and that people typically only die when circumstances out of their control are taking their life. Of course, people do take their life.
Right.
But generally, outside of those circumstances, that the default is right now that a person on this earth can live as long as they can practically do.
Yeah, the vast majority of people whose lives end, that is involuntary.
Yeah.
But imaginably, a person would need to continue taking something or following some protocol in order to continue with this immortality. And so they would opt out of it by stopping doing that. So they'd need to be continuously doing something in order to achieve that day to day.
Maybe, or unless the fundamental biological processes are naturally repairing.
Yeah, that's another option. Okay, regardless, I'm happy to go first. So I've been to some of your dinner parties, and so I'm familiar with the most common negative reactions to the idea of not dying or immortality. Let's just go through the bad ones first, which I don't agree with. I think the biggest bad argument is that it's not worth it if you don't get to enjoy certain hedonistic pleasures. And let's just assume that everyone that feels that way dies. We're only living with the people that don't feel that way. So that takes care of itself. Then there's it's always been this way. Death is natural.
For the audience listening, it's worth giving them context.
Yeah.
Where sometimes in these discussions, people will say, unless I can have, there was literally someone who loves fire Cheetos so much. She said, I don't know if I can't have my fire Cheetos if I want to continue to exist. And I think she wasn't really talking about fire Cheetos, but I think what she was saying is, unless I can choose to indulge when I want, in the way I want, I don't think I want. So she was basically putting a condition on her existence, just to lay this out as a...
I mean, from my perspective, that's not a good or a bad argument against living or dying. That's a personal choice. And so some people might feel that way about red wine or fire Cheetos or the ability to choose to do that. And so let's just assume that everyone that has chosen that is already dead. And fine. If people don't want it, they're more than welcome to not opt into this immortality. The other bad arguments are it's always been this way. The thing that makes life meaningful is death. Because, the Bible is how it gets processed, or whatever religious document. Life wouldn't be meaningful if it didn't end. Death is what gives life meaning. And that's a bad argument because if death was optional, then we would have made different or meaning-making documents, right? So that one isn't a good one. Then it's the moral right thing. People will argue that, if you stay on Earth, you're depriving future people from resources. And I think that's a bad argument too. It's like Paul Ehrlich, the population bomb, was written in the 60s, got debunked. Obviously, there's the Green Revolution. Since then, you can produce food. New people means more ideas. So I don't think those really work. Here are the reasons I think that a society where everyone doesn't die might be a problem. So I think about how we're defended militarily. In theory, there's a group of people in America who say they would die for the country. Almost every country has a group of people that maybe they would, some of them would, but that say they would die for the country. Most big ideas have groups of people, or religions have groups of people saying, I would die for this idea. And I'm worried at a group scale, if everyone wouldn't die for anything, that group gets outcompeted. by people that would be willing to die for their ideology, or that are able to project power based on that. So that's kind of the first thing. The second one is a group of people that doesn't die would be a group of people that gets older and older. And we're already starting to see demographic shift in post-industrial countries. And it seems like stagnation comes with getting older in terms of innovation. You can see how NIH grants keep on going to older scientists. There's been a lack of major scientific breakthroughs. It's harder for people to get funding to do new research or to get published in journals because most of things have been captured by older people. And those older people, they don't experiment as much. They don't take as many risks. And so you get military potential takeover. You get stagnation in terms of ideas as a population gets older. And that seems hard to avoid if you have an immortal group of people. And then the last one I thought is economic. So opportunity. Like when you have access to resources, let's say boomers to the US home ownership market, you don't just occupy the resources, you try to corner them off for yourself permanently. You try to kind of capture systems and entrench yourselves in them. So you don't just buy a house, you secure the value of the house by preventing the local council from adding any more permits to build property in your neighborhood. So it's not like we can just build new houses, we can just create new economic opportunities for the new people. The existing people entrench themselves and they try to corner everything that they can. We've seen this historically with people. And if we have a generation of people, the ones alive today, that never die, I mean, it sounds to me like it would suck economically to be someone born in like 2070, because how would you get anything? So those are some of my concerns if this actually worked out. What do you think of those?
Many of those things can be addressed through societal laws and norms. So, for example, there was this death tax idea that if somebody accumulated a lot of wealth and they want to pass it on, that it would be taxed quite a bit. So you're trying to stop that generational wealth from being passed to the accumulation of capital. That's kind of gone back and forth with various political parties. The threat you raise is real, that you'd have accumulation of power and entrenched interest, which would skew society. It would basically compromise the fair functioning of opportunity. And so I think you could probably address those things with legislation that, so basically it is not needed to, well, okay, let me think.
Well, so like the death tax is kind of the opposite. The death tax is if I do die and I pass and you're my child and you inherit from me, the government's in between taking a tax.
Yeah.
But the opposite would have to happen here, like a continued life tax.
Yeah. Society has acknowledged that the accumulation of wealth is potentially a thing, and legislation has been attempted to address that in some way, whether it's been efficacious or not. I mean, over the past couple of decades, there has been concentration of wealth among the wealthy, and so there's been disproportionate. So I think the world is out of balance today. I think is a reasonable argument to make that the world is not equitably represented, that there's potentially a lot more wealth concentrated than would be in a stable society. Let's just put that as a hypothesis. And that if we were to make that assessment and things were to change where people would start living longer, substantially longer, I think it would raise this concern in everybody's minds of, wait a second, this is not fair because compounded gains are going to accumulate a lot faster. Go ahead.
Okay, so here's the problem.
Yeah.
Any new legislation or regulation is typically introduced by people with the leverage to bring it about. Right.
Yeah.
So think about that homeowners association that has the leverage because they're the big property developer to get the mayor to block any new development. I can't imagine what kind of leverage the 2070 born person would have to convince the current holders of wealth and capital to just redistribute it to them.
Yeah. I mean, over time, sometimes when it's not solved in a polite way, revolutions happen. And like look at the French revolutions, right? The decapitations, where when a society is not stable in certain areas, sometimes people take action into their own hands. And so there are means in which society does change itself, sometimes through norms like legislation, sometimes through revolution, sometimes through violence. Of course, we don't want those things to happen, but I guess like society does have mechanisms through which it does correct certain things over time.
If people today are immortal, and they're cornering all the resources. That the young generation, if they're not redistributed resources, will have a revolution. But my concern is there are fewer and fewer people being born.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't seem practical with
Yeah.
the population pyramid as it is today to
Yeah.
have a revolution.
Yeah.
Like, what's the argument for how immortality would benefit someone born in
Yeah.
2070?
Yeah.
Why is this future person going to benefit from that? Or are they going to be kind of like indentured?
Your primary argument is that the compounding of wealth and of power is bad for society. And so if that's the case, then for anything to change, then those in power would need to initiate the change absent some kind of revolution.
My argument is that someone born in 2070 would have a worse life than they would otherwise because we've introduced immortality today.
Yeah, exactly. And so in that sense, if you want to stop that from happening, somebody needs to make the change. And those that are in power are those who have had compounded benefits. And so in either way, whether your argument runs through the same course that I'm arguing, is at some point in time, power needs to change. And if power is accumulating to those who are already in positions of compounded wealth, it has to go through them anyways. So society's got a change order problem.
All right, but how will the people born in 2070 create a revolution if there are very few of them compared to the people that are the immortals that are holding on to everything?
Yeah. So you're saying that it's a time dependent question, that it's better to address it now before it becomes even more skewed. Because if we don't do it now, then it will forever be gone.
Yeah, I wonder, because we're already seeing that with this generation, right?
Yeah.
When I went into the job market, what got me interested in crypto to begin with was the job market seemed so slick. It didn't seem like there was any texture to it, any kind of inefficiencies where you could come in and capitalize. It felt like that had already been smoothed over. So the only thing to do was get in at the very bottom, work your way up really gradually. It would take forever. There were all these kind of boomers in the way. The economic hierarchy at big companies felt really calcified, and crypto felt like a way to burst through or try to with, intelligence and drive. But what if there are fewer and fewer things like that?
Yeah. I imagine that looking back through history, that class struggle has been the consistent theme in every society. That we've never actually solved it in a permanent way. It's never achieved some kind of agreement by a society that everything is cool. There's always going to be misgivings that resources are allocated in a unfair way, and I guess that's probably like the foundation of most of our arguments: taxation, benefits. What you're raising is a perpetual problem of society, of who gets resources
Mhm.
and how are they distributed.
But there's always been this natural mechanism. It's almost like a mycelial mechanism, right? That everything, when it gets to a certain level of accumulation, it can't just stay around and continue compounding. It has to pass on its nutrients to something else. And you're getting rid of that mechanism. So I guess you're getting rid of nature's natural redistributive mechanism.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say I'm not entirely persuaded by this argument, because I think that events happen. For example, let's just say that the accumulation is in a certain nation state, and that nation state goes through some kind of financial turbulence or even bankruptcy. There's mechanisms beyond even that societal control which could reestablish that the distribution of resources. The impermanence of the world creates opportunities for change and rebalancing. And so I guess what you're arguing here is that if you take death out of the equation, that those natural mechanisms of rebalancing wouldn't work anymore. That the power would be so entrenched, it would be an iron grip over it, and they would be immune to the natural things that have otherwise kept it in check over time.
But your argument is that there would still be nations and companies, and even without, so nations don't have a natural time that they die.
Yeah.
Companies don't have a natural time that they die, and yet they do throughout history because they're outcompeted
Yeah.
because of. But that brings me to my second objection, which is the military objection. I mean, I think that every country that's ever existed, every religion that's ever existed has people that at least say they'd be willing to die for it. My question to you is there anything that you would die for? Is there anything that you would sacrifice your life for? And if there are zero things that fit that description, and if everybody was like you, then wouldn't it be really easy for some virulent group of people that would actually sacrifice their lives for something to immediately take over all these super risk-averse people?
Hmm. I mean, I suppose that the assumption there is that risk-averse people would not be as equipped or skillful in fighting as those who would be more kamikaze-like in their willingness. And I do wonder if that assumption would be false, that if those who are less risk-averse would just find new ways to engage in warfare that were equally as effective and didn't require them to employ methodologies that would be willfully death inclined. Where like if I end up losing my life, I feel honor about the outcome. And so I wonder if the psychology, I wonder if actually that would disadvantage those who are more kamikaze like in their mentality because they might be more sloppy in their execution.
I mean, the positive kind of psychological reading of the Jesus story is that to make the biggest sacrifice, to sacrifice your life for the greater good,
Mhm.
is one of the best and most rewarding things you can do, which is why every culture has put up on a pedestal Jesus, or there's a version of that in Indian culture, there's a version of that in so many different traditions, because that's the ultimate thing to do. At the core of each of these societies are some sort of kernel of people
Mhm.
that would be willing to do it, and that is frightening enough to the other societies. And yeah, I mean, war is becoming much more automated with
Mhm.
drones, but it's not there yet. I mean, we have Navy SEAL Team 6 going into locations directly. And there's also a lot of asymmetric military tactics that someone who's willing to make a sacrifice can do to make things really difficult for people that aren't willing to. And so I guess I imagine a future where there's some super conservative society of immortals that are too frightened to so much as go outside and get sunshine. If you think about like the incentives that come with immortality, it's like if you could potentially be immortal, why should you take any physical risk at all?
Mhm.
Versus a group of people that are wildly willing to sacrifice for their ideals. If those two groups came into contact, I don't know. I feel like I would probably pick group 2
Mhm.
to win.
Mhm.
No?
I mean, I guess the question you're asking has embedded in it an assumption that death is inevitable. And so I think if you look back at the people who've been willing to make that sacrifice, the calculus is something like, I know I'm going to die, therefore, I might as well go out in glory. And then you just basically pick your glorification path. So it could be that you're a warrior and you want to achieve honor in your quest. It could be in your profession that you want to achieve some kind of extraordinary professional accomplishment where you're immortal in that sense, where people write books about you and you're remembered and talked about. Like we know certain people from our history are immortal in terms of things we reference them frequently. And so I'd say if that's the underlying assumption, and then I'd say second step in this thought process is I would probe at the durability of our current beliefs. So, for example, in the year 2000, if you asked a 10-year-old person, made the following statement: "I know what I want to be when I grow up,"
Mhm.
and then we rate, the possibility that could be true. And now in the year 2000, we may say that person absolutely can grow up to become. Let's say they want to grow up to become a doctor. And so we'd say there's 100% confidence that that person can pursue that path and succeed in that path. Now, if that person were to say that in the year 2025, when I grow up, I want to become a doctor, that means by the time they finish their schooling, it's something like 15 to 20 years down the line. The confidence I would place on that as their ability to pursue it would be zero, because it's not clear to me that doctors have a viable role in society in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years from now.
Wow. I mean, medical schools are full of humans currently.
Exactly.
Do you think they should not be?
I'm saying it is a very serious, like if you look at the AI tools and their ability to diagnose, if they and robotic surgeries and stuff like that, it's not clear to me that humans will be in the role of doctors. In the same way it's been, has been.
Mhm.
Now it may evolve, but what I'm saying is that the durability of our ability to say something about the future
Mhm.
is dramatically limited. And so in this question of whether there's a belief system of if I'm going to go out, I might as well go out in glory. if you fast forward that 5 years from now, the assumption is that that belief is still durable. And it could be the case that technology changes so much and a person's ability to live a healthy life changes so much that it may weaken so dramatically the assumption that people want to go out in glory that it's not even like people wouldn't even want to do that anymore.
Like perhaps human glory as a construct at all is unavailable.
Exactly.
Super interesting argument. Do you think that all accomplishment is just a preparation for death?
Yes.
So that's really interesting. So going and becoming a doctor, going and writing a book, going on Don't Die tour, having a child, any kind of accomplishment is so something can be there after you're gone, even if you don't consciously think of it as being motivated that way, even if you don't realize it.
That's right. Every action we make is in preparation of death.
And yet, if every action we make is motivated by preparation for death, if death isn't going to happen or if it's avoidable, then why take any action? Why have any ambition? Why do anything at all?
We've seen this where people experience radical life changes where a fully functioning person becomes a quadriplegic. There's an adaptation period, but then the person restores a similar level of joy of life they had before. The brain adapts to new circumstances. And so I would say that humans, I mean, there's been thousands of human societies throughout history, and they've all had variations of customs, norms, beliefs. Death has always been a staple. Like they've always planned for death. But I would say that our ability to adapt to new circumstances is remarkable. And so I would say I would place a bet that we will very quickly evolve to new circumstances and will occupy new states of ambition and meaning making that we don't recognize now, but solves that problem. This is something that comes up in the Don't Die dinner where people, if they don't immediately know what the meaning making game is for, they give up on existence. They're just like, I don't think I want to exist. And what they don't realize is that throughout their entire life, you're always adapting your meaning-making games to keep yourself afloat. You're always telling yourself new stories of what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it that gives you hope and motivation.
So if all human accomplishment is made to transfer into post-death legacy, and if that's the only thing, is that what you're motivated by doing Don't Die? You're trying to make Don't Die into your post-death legacy?
My origin for this, my foundation is that we're currently at an apex of knowing. Like the human race has accomplished a lot up until this point in time, like in incredible technological accomplishments and societal building accomplishments. And I think accompanying that, we have quite a bit of confidence in our own abilities and quite a bit of confidence in what we think we know. And I'm taking the contrarian bet that we actually don't know what we're talking about anymore. That in the context of AI, that the changes we will experience will exceed what we comprehend and will morph us into something we can't imagine. And therefore, I take the stance that I don't know. And therefore, I think that's a stronger, more accurate position than I think trying to model out what I think I know.
So your answer, to make sure I have it right, to the question of wouldn't a group of people willing to die for their ideas outcompete militarily through violence, through force, a group of people that won't so much as go out in the sunshine because their incentives are to be very protective over their lives? The reason why this group wouldn't outcompete that group is because meaning making itself has completely shifted because of the availability of immortality to the point where an accomplishment like dying for your legacy with honor, even that idea will be completely gone. Could be completely gone.
I'm saying, yes. And also I'm saying that the incentive to continue to exist is stronger than the incentive to die for my cause. And therefore, if you just simply say who has a greater intensity and a want to win that battle, I'd argue potentially it's those who don't want to die, that they would be more motivated. So even though their tactics would be different because they're not willing to engage in tactics that create excessive risk. Therefore, they would try to design their strategies to minimize their risk. But I'd say it wouldn't at all lessen. It would increase the intensity which they'd be willing to engage in that battle because they don't want to die.
So give me liberty or give me death. has a new ring to it. And if, let's say, you are the American colonists
Yeah.
in this case, and you're being oppressed through taxation by England
Yeah.
in this example, you would say, give me liberty, or I'll try as hard as I possibly can without allowing myself to get a paper cut.
I mean, it's almost like burning the boats, right? Like that's the historical example where you arrive to a new land, the boats are there, the general burns the boats, you can't go back. There's no retreat, right? You either win the war or you're dead. And so I think it really does play into an intense psychological motivation that you better be right and you better be good. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think it's an unfair match. I think that psychologically they're probably paired very well. And I think that those who want to exist have just as compelling of a meaning-making game as those that want to die for their cause and in glory. And I think that even those who want to die in cause for their glory, I guess they're always going to have a strong justification for their own means. It's probably an inevitable confrontation that will happen between humans in those two spots. However, I wouldn't default in thinking that one group has a moral high ground more than the other one.
So do you think it's okay that, if you talk to the average American person, average European person, and ask them, what's the thing that you're living for? Is there anything you would die for? And they look at you increasingly and they have no explanation for why we're here. They have nothing in particular that they would die for, no, meaning that's that significant to them. You don't think that that's a weakness of those societies, that it's currently really missing that? And you don't think that that makes it susceptible to being outcompeted by something more virulent?
It's a possible state where future humans view the need for a meaning-making game as childish. Like right now, in this, you and I've listened to these conversations. When you present this scenario to people that they don't immediately understand why they exist, right? They want to end their life.
Mm-hmm.
It's so uncomfortable, they can't sit with it. And I think that's just a reflection of the current human mind, but I don't think it's going to be a for sure thing in the future human mind.
Mm-hmm.
And the future human mind be like, those meaning-making games were actually really destructive because it locks you into these paths of behavior and actions where you become so focused, you have all these biases and cognitive limitations, you become self-destructive because you've locked into an endpoint which blinds you to everything else. So this is what I'm saying, like there's so many pathways that we could change our cognition, which would just remap the entire framework. And I go back to, I think your usage of the American Revolution is a good one, that it was founded on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think the next iteration of that is the right to exist, that is the fundamental right. And I think this also probably applies to AI, where this question is going to arise, can you pull the plug on an AI, like on a certain model? Or does that model have a right to exist? And do humans have a right to exist? And do animals have a right to exist?
I mean, I take some issue with right to exist. Like, who needs to provide that right? Like, it's like when people say you have a right to healthcare. Well, who's going to pay for that healthcare? Are you going to enslave doctors and force them to give you healthcare? So I feel like things that can exist by themselves or convince other things around them that they can exist will get to exist, and things that can't do that can't. And I don't know about the framing of rights there, but what you were saying makes me think of something else, and you can correct my framing if it's wrong. But I almost think how you're conceiving of don't die is post-meaning. It's not like a new type of meaning, a new purpose that people can add to their current paradigm. I'm here to not die. It's saying all of those meaning-making games of the past were themselves vestigial and destructive. And existing is self-justifying. Existing is self-evident. It's its own meaning. And this previous loop of a search for meaning, like even Viktor Frankl, like man's search for meaning, just shouldn't exist. No more meaning, post-meaning.
Exactly right. I'm saying that existence itself is the highest virtue, no qualification needed.
Super interesting. So everyone's looking around saying, what are we going to do for meaning and purpose in the age of AI? Where are we going to find meaning and purpose? We used to find it as hunter-gatherers on the savannah, feeding ourselves. We used to play survival game, mating game, children's survival game. But now there's no more game. The game is over, and we're post-meaning. Does that feel right?
Yeah. And it could be the case, yes, and to this, that we find that meaning-making games are the source of violence and species-level risk. So if my meaning-making game is to be an American, and your meaning-making game is to be Chinese, and I think that the Americans are good and the Chinese are bad, and the Chinese think Americans are good, the bad, or the Chinese are good, right? Our meaning-making games create conflict. Or if I think, so in many ways, meaning-making games get a pass as good.
Mm-hmm.
Because we say that's what gives us purpose and meaning and drive. And we can't imagine a world absent of meaning-making games. That doesn't mean like we actually can't operate in that world. It just means we are demonstrating a lack of imagination. It's just like the question, do you want to live forever? And it basically like makes the brain shut down, like literally shuts down. And people don't realize that question is identical to, do you want to live tomorrow? And so like those are the same concept. So humans don't stop and say, I really do want to live for tomorrow. And I also acknowledge that living for tomorrow and living forever are the same ideas, but that my brain can't process the living forever idea. Humans just shut it down without realizing their lack of cognition to actually accept that idea is actually something very practical about tomorrow.
Super fascinating. I can still totally imagine a world, though, where almost everyone has accepted this new post-meaning world and has no meaning, and a small but virulent group of people resurrects from the past a secret little vial of meaning, and then high on that vial of meaning, they come in and ransack everybody else who are just sitting ducks because they're so committed to, not stubbing their toe. But perhaps that's just sci-fi material. Want to cover the innovation question. So we've already been seeing a preview of immortal societies because living just a day longer every day, well, that's what people that are currently on the older side are increasingly doing. In many places, life is getting longer, but we're seeing the result of that in less innovation, fewer breakthroughs, more kind of consolidation of funding for new projects. You even see it culturally. It's not just tech innovation. I mean, so many of the movies that come out are now these low-risk kind of sequels to the movie that returned capital last time. If we achieve this, we're going to head toward a world with more older people compared to younger people. How does that world not come with intellectual innovation, calcification?
My mind is like running through all the historical examples that I can think of where a certain generation imagined certain things to be true, and they took the patterns of their time and they mapped it out to the future. And then the future turned out to be very different than what they imagined.
But there's also the expression that doing the same thing and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity.
I go back to the prediction of if a 10-year-old says, I want to be blank when I grow up, there are some things which I think are stable. Like, for example, I think humanity and intelligence generally will probably have an insatiable appetite for energy. That's probably a pretty durable thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's probably also true that humans will have an insatiable appetite for the need to repair aging and biological processes if we go down that path.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of those more stable things of prediction, I think everything else is up for grabs on how it evolves. And I wouldn't dare try to prognosticate or predict what those things will be. And so when I try to imagine those scenarios, I know that a lot of people would take that argument and make really compelling arguments. They string words together. They're very compelling. And again, I take this contrarian approach where I'm usually one of the only people that I encounter with where I take the very hard position of I just don't know. And I think I don't know is actually the stronger answer than using my models of reality to map out what I think could be the possibility.
Isn't it worth it to try to think out whether an outcome where everyone has a worse time as a result of making immortality available, isn't it worth it trying to take the current trends and extrapolate them to see whether that would make sense to do as a society?
Yeah, I think your first argument is actually really good, which is will there be a continuation of a concentration of power? I think there's a reasonable approach to say that's not a good idea for society.
Well, so what you were saying with energy, like you believe in two trends. There's this trend with energy. We're going to keep on wanting it insatiably. And then there's this trend with our bodies. We're going to want to keep on fixing them. And this group of people who select into being immortal is definitely going to want to keep fixing them. What about the natural human desire for power, safety, to sort yourself status-wise compared to other people. Don't you think that's as natural to who we are and how we evolved as some of our other needs? So why would that not continue?
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine like an Ozempic-like drug for status, right? For example, like a human desire is to eat and feel satiated. And even overeat, maybe like overindulge. Like we have very powerful drives to eat food. And when somebody is on Ozempic or a similar drug, it eliminates that desire. You no longer feel compelled to eat. And so if you can do that for hunger, like a core thing about the human experience, why couldn't you do a similar drug for the desire for power or the desire for status or the desire for other things? I'm not saying that's a good idea. I'm saying that as we develop greater abilities to develop drugs, why can't we imagine easily modifying ourselves so those things are switched off, either through drugs or genetic modifications or other things? To me, we have the ability to engineer biology in increasingly powerful ways. Why would I limit my imagination in any way that it would change any aspect of my conscious existence?
Well, I feel like individuals opt into Ozempic because they want to lose weight.
Yeah.
But I feel like most individuals wouldn't opt into no longer having the desire to accumulate power and status. I think some people would voluntarily opt into taking that version of Ozempic, but many wouldn't. Would you compel all of humanity to take mind-altering drugs that make them stop having human behaviors?
Yeah, I mean, I think that many people are tortured by status. That if you think about our current landscape in social media, the compulsive desire to be checking in on social status, like doom scrolling, is you don't want to be missing out. You want to be posting, so you're part of the conversation. You feel like you don't, people will forget about you in the community. You don't have a similar status, and so I think the algorithms that are built are basically built to lure you in, where you have basically no choice but to play the status game with other people. I think many people find it to be torture, and I think it could be the case that it actually has a very negative effect on their psyche, that they're less happy, less productive, less creative individuals because they're owned by the status systems.
Would you take a drug that was like Ozempic? Because you are taking a microdose of Ozempic, right?
I stopped, but I did trial it, yeah.
Would you take a drug that turned off your physiological response to social status?
I would absolutely trial it. So for example, like years ago, I grappled with the feeling of jealousy. Right. So I had this in a relationship, I had like jealousy as an emotion. And I thought that is such a silly emotion. Like it's so illogical, right? Because I'm trying to compensate for a feeling of lack of control. Like, so if I'm in a relationship and I feel secure in my relationship, then I don't need to feel jealousy because I know what this relationship means. And also it's a case where I can't control the outcome, where the fear is like, if this person is engaged with someone else, that I'm somehow threatened by that experience. And so I actively worked on myself to eliminate jealousy as an emotion. And I was successful. I don't feel jealousy. And so, yes, I'm because I just think it's an unproductive emotion for me to have as a human. I just worked through it. Like it's an irrational feeling. Like I'm not threatened, and if I am threatened, I'm okay with the outcome.
But don't people feel jealous because they genuinely sense that they might like lose a romantic partner to someone else?
And so I guess it was just me reconciling that the feeling of jealousy doesn't stop that from happening. So if the partner does,
so the feeling doesn't it doesn't help you actually prevent
exactly
that outcome.
Exactly, right? So like
And might make it worse.
Exactly,
Makes
it makes it worse because like there's like this really boomerang effect with it, where jealousy creates a trapping of somebody and the other partner feels it. So yeah, I systematically worked. I eliminated jealousy from my life. So I just don't feel it. I like to imagine a future where I would be just fine with no meaning, with no status, no power, no jealousy. Like, it might be the most liberating experience possible in consciousness if we scrape away these various things which we think, like we're so attached to these ideas that we can't imagine existence without these things. But I think the opposite could be true. In the same way, like with my protocol, like people can't imagine that I don't want to secretly eat donuts and pizza and candy and other stuff, I don't. Like the feeling of doing that is so bad.
Except for when you were on your trip recently.
Exactly. So yeah, so I did an experiment recently. I went to Europe for 11 days and I experimented with sleep deprivation. So I got around 6 hours per night for 11 days. And it was stunning how fast my body broke down. And so even after one night, the prefrontal cortex activity goes down by 15%. Your body starts craving intensely, fatty foods, salty foods. Your feeling of satiety also goes down. So you have all these things happening. So by day 3 or 4, I was like, this is kind of annoying. Like day 5 or 6, I was like, it's getting pretty strong. By day 11, I was an animal. Like my amygdala was running my decisions where it was like, I'm looking around of like, what can I eat? And I desperately wanted to eat bad stuff. It took me back in time to my previous self as an entrepreneur, where I literally felt powerless to stop myself. I didn't want to do it. I hated doing it, but I couldn't stop myself. It was a really great experiment. I also, it helps me now. I can relate to people so much better now because I've forgotten about this. But I think that, like, the value here for people who are listening is it's just like a big breath in and a big breath out, that it's possible that the things we are attached to may not be our friends, but they may be the things that actually limit our ability to mature as a species. And that's just not an argument that's presented. It's so firmly like trying to keep things the way they are that we just lose sight of that possibility.
All of my pro-death arguments about how a group is going to have better group survival if death is available and plentiful versus a group where it's rare come from the idea that life proceeds by a series of prisoners' dilemmas. If this group over here doesn't have enough economic mobility, then they're going to get outcompeted by this group over there where smart people are allowed to accumulate resources. Or if this group over here is all afraid of getting a paper cut, then this group over there who's willing to sacrifice their lives is going to outcompete them militarily. If, this group is all getting old, so they aren't taking risks and innovating, they're going to get outcompeted by a group that's willing to take risks. But what you're saying is even that construct itself, even the prisoner's dilemma, even game theory itself, which is based on this cascade of prisoner's dilemmas, will dissipate and is itself a construct of an old template for being. And we're basically going to have Ozempic-like drugs to inoculate all of us against those impulses.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm saying that your group competition dynamics may be changed because the underlying conditions may also change.
But it sounds like the end of evolution. Like the kinds of conditions I'm describing are evolution, survival of the fittest. And that selection, that adaptation happens through competition. And it's not just people that are subject to that. It's animals, it's trees, it's, the root systems of trees collaborate and compete like that. So do you think what we're about to do is exempt ourselves from continuing to be subject to evolution?
If you look at the United States of America and many developed countries, we no longer are subject to those same evolutionary principles. If a member of society were not as capable as another one, they would get knocked out of the food chain, right? They'd be knocked off pretty quickly. Whereas in our society, they're safe because we have protections around them that they didn't have before.
Well, people are still subject to evolution. It's just that we are shielding people that are weak as a group from dying.
Exactly.
But evolution is still working on humans.
Exactly.
There's still competition.
Agreed. It's like there's elements still present, but it's also shifted a little bit. For hundreds of millions of years, the operating system evolution did its thing, and since we became a technological society, those dynamics have changed a little bit. And so I guess what I'm saying is there's probably some future where there's some continuation of some things, but we may choose a different evolutionary path because we are now kind of designing many elements of our own evolutionary system. It's emergent in ways which may surprise us. And so I don't think it's a fair starting point to say what has been the rules of evolution will be the rules of evolution. It could be we opt for different rules of evolution because it's in our power to do so. And the systems of biology, it's more in our control of design than it is we being subject to its design.
I can give you examples now of how we're subject to evolution. There are certain groups of people, let's say Amish, Mormons, Hasidic Jews, that are reproducing a lot. And then there are groups of people that aren't reproducing as much. And one can argue with the absence of immortality, the future belongs to the people that reproduce more. So even if we don't have that negative selection, if people are nearsighted, they're not going to get killed. We also have this positive selection going on where certain people are moving into the future and certain people aren't. If you're saying that all negative evolutionary pressure is going to go away, like everyone can live, everyone can reproduce, everyone can thrive, doesn't that assume an insane degree of abundance? There's no competition for anything.
Yeah, I'm not saying that all the conditions will change. I'm saying that we are in this transition where we have been subject to evolution, and we are moving into a new world where we are more the designers of evolution. And so there's going to be some some open space of what does society choose to be the evolutionary principles. We'll of course, be subject to some things. Like we just can't control all things in the immediate future, but we'll have more choice and more power than we have ever in the past. And we will have more choice in our evolutionary systems, possibly.
So we're going to have an Ozempic-like drug to disable the systems in ourselves that are destructive. We will no longer be in a game theoretic situation, because I mean, that's really crazy. Yeah, I don't know if you ever read the Slate Star Codex essay on Moloch, but the thesis there is that all of history has proceeded by prisoners' dilemmas. Every single choice is just an accumulation and then the residue of all these prisoners' dilemmas, and no one's ever thought about the way to get around the prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah.
How do you have both prisoners agree to cooperate as opposed to each defecting?
Yeah.
And what you're saying is we can actually change how game theory works at a fundamental level by giving everybody an Ozempic-like drug that makes them cooperate, or by having so much abundance that there's no more necessity to even think of defecting.
Yeah. I basically, you could probably summarize my arguments and say that the majority of the way the world understands itself today and thinks about the future is based upon first principles thinking. You take the patterns you can see from history and you identify what patterns you can use to map the future. And so you're doing your very best for pattern matching past, present, future. And that's a very reasonable way to approach life. That's how our brains work. I'm arguing for zeroth principle possibilities. And I do that because I think it's largely absent from most people's thinking. And so, for example, in the discussion around what the future could be, I haven't heard anybody present the argument that we will not have meaning and it will be a source of joy.
Right? Post-meaning.
Yeah,
I like post-meaning.
Exactly. It's like, but that's what I don't necessarily say I want that. I'm not saying I'm advocating for it. I'm saying that that is a possibility set that should be in our contemplation, but we miss it because it's not a first principles argument. And so all my arguments are basically saying zeroth principle discoveries have happened, and it changes not just the XY coordinates, it changes the entire graph. And so examples are, for example, are Einstein's special theory of relativity. So if you just said you have a Newtonian physics world and you're mapping out reality based upon this framework, Einstein dropped a new framework that changed the equation of how you think about physics and the universe. And so what I'm saying is an equivalent thing would be for human experience would be we no longer need meaning. And actually we find meaning the most dangerous of human traits.
It sounds like you're similar to Francis Fukuyama, but many years later, and hopefully with better luck, predicting the end of history.
I mean, possibly. I'm saying that there's like a really interesting thought space of 1 and 0 contemplations. Many of my life experiences are now suggesting to me that it's a real possibility that these more zeros could be a real thing that we deal with in life.
So to take it in a different direction, it seems like you have a pretty rosy vision of where we could end up in the future, disabling some of the negative parts of ourselves. Do you ever worry about AI doom, or are you an abundance guy? Where do you place yourself on that spectrum these days?
I don't have an opinion. I don't have either. I don't see things through a positive or negative lens. I'm neutral in it. because I don't think we know enough to either express optimism or pessimism. And so I'm just neutral in that I'm trying to say we don't know, therefore, because I don't want to necessarily attach an emotion. I think like whenever I attach an emotion to a certain thing, I find that it clouds my judgment. So if I enter into an optimistic state, I have a bias towards trying to find things to support my optimistic viewpoint. And the same is true with pessimism. Like same thing with jealousy, right? Like it was like a thing that clouded my judgment. It compromised my behavior. I didn't behave in a way that was appropriate for the relationship. And I would say the same thing with an emotion attached to a judgment. I'd rather divorce myself from that.
This is very Zen. Have you ever considered Zen?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of overlap.
Very cool. So instead of everyone at AI conferences giving you their P-doom, we should all practice radical non-attachment.
Yeah, I think that attachment is one of our greatest risks. In our current situation, humanity will only save itself if it can do so while making money. So we really struggle to act in our best interest because we're so attached to power, status, and wealth. We're willing to martyr our existence to achieve these objective functions because the intensity is so high.
We can more easily imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism.
Exactly, right? And so this is what I'm saying is, so if that's why I'm willing to say, is status really a good thing, or is status tethering us? Is status our enemy? Like the fact that we're so uncompromisingly attached to that as an objective function, we just can't see straight.
Do you think that we won't survive as a species unless we disable our attachment to wealth, money, and power?
So from a practical standpoint, I don't think it's realistic to ask humans to change. We are wired the way we are. The world is structured the way it is. I like this thought experiment where imagine that there's such a thing as an existence machine. And every day, everybody's behavior, every individual, every company's and every corporation, every country's actions are processed through this existence machine. And this machine rates those behaviors, whether they increase life or decrease life. Now, just put aside for a moment the complexities of that.
Different time scales,
Yeah.
whose life here.
Exactly. So just put that aside for a minute. And based upon that conclusion, your bank account or a country's bank account or a corporation's bank account went up or down based upon that conclusion. So basically, the objective function for society was everything that increased life created more wealth. Everything that decreased life created, subtracted wealth.
But isn't that just creating a new status game where we are competing in order to get the status of creating the most life?
Exactly.
And the only reason that we're even engaged in that ambition in the first place is because death exists and we're planning to transfer our asset of creation into death legacy?
It is. It's like Indiana Jones, where he's swapping out the things in the temple. And what I'm saying is that humans want to compete on status, power, wealth. Like that is the game everybody's locked in on. And people have so much invested in this game, they're not willing to play a new game. They want that game to happen. If you change the endpoint, however, from to existence, humans still can be humans. We can compete on our current primal proclivities. You just have the entire human race fighting for existence now as the singular objective function. Now, in that scenario, like it's a fanciful kind of thought experiment, but to me, it kind of gets to the heart of the issue. Is that as a species, we cannot overcome ourselves to try to save ourselves, and it's the same way when people commit.
The master's house, the master's tools, right?
Exactly. Like people can't stop themselves from slow suicide, from eating the thing that they know is actually causing their body harm, or from missing sleep or not exercising. They know these things cause death, but they can't stop themselves. And when they can't stop themselves, they make up games. They make up stories of like, I am pursuing this mission-driven thing to make the world a better place, or I'm sacrificing myself for this larger objective. So we bury ourselves in these meaning-making games and stories, but it's all a cover that we can't do what we know is actually in our best interest. And so we're so wrapped up in this moment, we just can't see clearly. And so yes, I think that the things we hold on to be the greatest virtues are potentially our greatest enemies.
I don't know if I'm convinced, because maybe I'm so rooted personally in an evolutionary, competitive prisoner's dilemma dynamic persisting on Earth.
Yeah.
And I guess I only think that because it always has persisted.
Yeah.
But then you wonder, is that any different from the mythology that's always persisted that life is meaningful because of death?
Yeah.
And perhaps it could change.
Yeah. So I guess I want to argue that it is very common when I talk to people that they are willing to trade years, end of life, for some kind of pleasure in the moment. So they'll choose to say, I want to drink alcohol, or I want to stay out late, or I want to like do these various things because when I'm 70 or 80, I don't care about those last 10 years of life. They're miserable anyways.
Mhm.
And then when you talk to somebody who's 70 or 80 or even 90, they want to live as much as someone when they was 20,
Totally.
right? And they may be hurting, and then like life may be really challenging, but they still want to exist.
I think there's no good argument for why there shouldn't be amortality at the individual level, right? People at 18 raise their hand, I want to
Yeah.
exist. People at 80 raise their hand,
Yeah.
I want to exist.
Yeah.
People start to not want to exist when it sucks being in their
Yeah.
avatar for some reason.
Exactly. And so I guess what I want to argue is, so right now, the person I'm talking to is Amanda in the year 2025.
Mhm.
Now, let's say that you have a lifespan where you're going to live to be 100 years old. What might be a reasonable future contemplation is that I have Amandas that represent every year of you until you're 100 years old. These are simulated versions of you. Let's just say we use large-scale population data,
Mhm.
and we take you as an archetype, and we say, Amanda, with all of her characteristics of intelligence, how can we model out how Amanda is likely to think and believe and have emotions when she's 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, and like so on. And so now we could have this dialogue where right now there's 75 Amandas in the room,
Mhm.
and we're talking about, Amanda, what is your opinion on blank? And so I think that we even have this very strong bias where right now you somehow get the authority to decide what you want or don't want. But that is not considering your future versions, which may have a different opinion than what you have now. And because the world is changing so fast, I think we overweight what we want in this moment without considering our future selves and how our opinions may change. And this goes back to the idea of how accurately can I predict what I will want in 10 years from now when the world has changed like beyond my ability to understand. The underlying circumstances are changing so fast that none of us can express an opinion of confidence on almost anything other than we don't want to die right now. And so that's why I think it really undercuts most of everybody's opinions of whether they want this or that. So what do you think about that?
I think there's a trade-off between freedom and optionality and decisiveness. So if you think about something like choosing a career or getting into a relationship or deciding to specialize in a particular subject matter or deciding to have a child, you're saying that I'm deciding right now that I'm going to tie my ship to a certain direction. I'm going to commit to something. I'm going to put a stake in the ground. And there's going to be an opportunity cost associated with that stake. And I'm going to restrict my freedom of motion in the future because I've decided to put that stake in the ground.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth it to restrict my future freedom of motion in order to pursue that partner, in order to pursue that career, which means I can't study the other thing, in order to pursue. And I think it's just always that trade-off. And I don't personally think the answer is never make that trade-off. Otherwise, you just end up infinitely open in every way without having said anything decisive about yourself. As far as living or dying, I think it makes sense to choose every day to be alive, to maximize optionality. But I think if there's nothing that you want to stake, if there's nothing that you want to do with that time, if you're equanimous, if you're not holding on to or attached to anything, if you let go of all of those attachments and all those meaning-making games, isn't the desire to be alive itself an attachment and a meaning-making game? And if I'm truly equanimous, if I'm truly Zen, if you ask me, do I care right now to live or die? I think I could answer, I don't care. The only thing I'm afraid of about death is pain. And just being on versus being off, totally equanimous.
Yeah, that's fair. So it's almost like humanity is afforded one vice, and that one vice is you want to exist. And outside of that,
And that's the one meaning-making game you're affording us.
Exactly.
But there's just almost like another step if we're going in kind of a Zen direction where you even no longer afford yourself that one attachment and you're truly equanimous.
Yeah, agreed. That definitely is the final step. Yeah, where you become indifferent to existence and you're okay with all states. Yeah, the unknown, yeah. Would you be open to the idea you would suspend some of your opinions for some duration of time to let this moment with AI kind of like shift the sands a bit for you to feel like what may be coming, to just experience what it'd be like to suspend your opinions of what you want or what you imagine might be?
Absolutely. I mean, here's a question, right? Do I think I'm going to feel later like I have more of a handle on how things are going? I think I'm going to feel like I have less of a handle on how things are going than more.
Yeah.
I mean, if the pace of change is itself accelerating, if we're actually on an exponential, this right now is the most we're ever going to have a sense of what's going on.
Exactly.
As opposed to later.
Yeah.
So I kind of reject the premise that later I'll have a sense of how it's all shaking out.
Yeah. So I agree with you. And that's why I asked the question, because it's almost like when I talk to people and I try to convince them that making sleep their number one life priority is a good idea, I get so much pushback. And this is specifically from founders. Well, they'll put up the arguments of like, but I've got to work 18 hours a day because I'm doing this thing and I have to work hard on my competition and my investors and my employees. And so they get so trapped in that cycle, and they think if they sleep, they're somehow losing the game or they're somehow becoming weak. And so I work them and they finally get into a system where they're sleeping well, and they say, this is the best thing I've ever done in my life. I'm more clear-headed, I make better judgments, my mood is more stable. Maybe I don't have the depression and anxiety that crushed me before, but it's very rare that a person does that and comes out like, yeah, honestly, life was better when I was doing 4 hours of sleep per night. And I feel like the same is true with suspending one's attachments to whatever they believe. And so if you just simply go through the exercise and say, I'm going to give myself a pause, that I'm not going to ardently believe what I imagine might be the case, I'm just going to let it all go, that once you experience it once, you might come back and be like, honestly, I was trapped before.
Do you ever pause your attachment to non-dying?
Yeah. Happy to the experiment. I mean, I'm open to all these things. I mean, I agree, like the don't die may be the ultimate irony, right? The attachment to not dying, may be the greatest enemy. So I've been very open to it. The philosophy is trying to be the most practical implementation of something that actually works in society. Because if we all step out of the game and we're all attached from everything, like we don't have clean running water, like disease is going to be rampant, crime. And so I guess what I'm saying is like, if you just say,
one can't still manage all those things with an attitude of non-attachment and equanimity emotionally.
If everybody were to check out of society, right? Like so I took your example of like, basically everyone's like, I don't want to do anything anymore for any reasons. But yeah, like if we pair trying to be a cooperative, like being a cooperative person in a community, and we just detach ourselves, yeah, certainly could be a paired. Yeah, why not? So what do you think? You walked in today with a certain set of ideas and opinions. Where are you at now?
I think that in the short term, theoretically, it's possible that a group of people that are willing to die for their beliefs can innovate better technology because they're motivated by these meaning-making games or by social mobility, that could outcompete a group of frightened elderly people. But I can also imagine a world where the basic game theory dynamics have shifted, either because of biochemistry or because of just the game board actually moving, that genuinely ending game theory and ending the prisoner's dilemma, such that that whole construct is moot. And that I had not walked in thinking about. So I think those two are interesting. I think don't die as the final attachment is interesting. I think living post-meaning, I think there's something there for sure. Like people are really worried about this loss of meaning and purpose, and I think post-meaning might be an interesting place to go. Reasonable takeaways?
I think that's great.
What about you?
I think this conversation brought awareness to me that in these Don't Die dialogues, these dinners I have, when I talk to people about these ideas, it's such a gigantic task because you're basically trying to unpack their entire existence. Like they have a full stack of existence of why they exist, why they do what they do, their meaning making games. They've got entrenched interests. It's just like full on. And Don't Die kind of says, put all of that on hold. There's a new way to understand existence, and it's very jarring. And this conversation we had helped me understand a different way to have the conversation, like around meaning, for example, that people panic, and I haven't had an ability to walk them through a process where they see meaning as the enemy, not as the ultimate solve. And in doing that, you demonstrated like extreme open-mindedness where you're like, that's interesting. So, but I've seen people panic so badly, they just shut down. They can't have a conversation anymore because they're so stuck on that. So I think it was an unlock for me of like how to explore these new ideas that get people out of a paralyzed state.
Cool. Glad we did it.
Yeah.
Thank you for making the time.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Endgame. Please follow me on X, Amanda Cassatt, 2 S's, 2 T's. Follow the company I founded, Serotonin HQ, and listen wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the works.